Alrighty, welcome back. Let's jump right into Natas 16 here. You can see I'm already authenticated and I have the web page open. And it looks like we may have seen this one before. This looks like the dictionary.txt file where we're able to sort of grep whatever we input in this form here, but it looks like they now filter even more on certain characters. And if we look at the page source, we can actually get a look at what is being filtered this time. And seemingly, yes, there are more characters being filtered. You can see we have the standard semicolon, the pipe character, and the and, sort of preventing us from being able to run consecutive commands. But it looks like there are a couple more. So we have the backtick here, as well as this is just an escape slash here, meaning that the single quote and the double quote character are also sort of filtered out. So we can't use any of these highlighted here, which sort of makes things difficult this time around, especially if we look at the pass-through command here. So we can see we have our grep command defined, which is going to be run on the local web server. But in this case, our key variable, which is going to be our user-supplied input, is actually sort of nested in between these escape double quotes here, which is going to make it very difficult for us to escape this because obviously we can't input our own double quote like we've been doing with SQL injection vulnerabilities. And also we can't run any of those, like I said, we can't run any of those consecutive commands because we can't terminate the command with the semicolon, we can't add the double pipes or the double ampersands. And just to make sure everything's working as expected, if we just put in anything, once again, for example, you can see we are getting that dictionary.txt output. So we do actually have some options here. If we go back to the page source, we aren't allowed to use the backtick, and that'll become more relevant later. But there is another way or another method that we can use to take advantage of something called command substitution. So why don't we look up what that means? So command substitution. So you can see this preview here is basically saying command substitution in bash sort of allows us to execute a command and substitute it with its own standard output. And if we want a bit more context, let's go to the GNU manual here at gnu.org. And we can see again, so command substitution allows for the output of a command to replace the command itself. And you can see there are two different sort of methods of using this, two different types of syntax. We have this sort of $ with the command inserted in parentheses, which we've actually sort of looked at before when we were running our natas.sh script. We actually inputted our own sort of cat command inside here so we can get the standard output of that cat command and inject it into our script. But you can see this other option here uses backticks, which sort of makes sense as to why that was sort of a filtered out character, because they don't want us to be able to do command substitution, but fortunately, they still allow us to use the $ and the parentheses. We can get a bit more context here. So in this case, with the command, bash is going to perform the expansion by executing whatever command we supply in a subshell environment and replacing the command substitution with the standard output of said command. So how can we sort of demonstrate this? Well, I have a directory set up here, and I have a sample dictionary.txt file. If I just cat that out, you can see I just chose the word explode and basically copied whatever the output would be. So we have a bunch of words that start with explode, I think. Yeah, you can see we have explore and a bunch of others. Then I also have a sample flag.txt file. You can sort of think of this file as, what's going to be on the Natas web server under /natas_webpass directory under the Natas 17 file. This isn't the actual password, but sort of an example so I can sort of demonstrate what we're going to be doing with command substitution. So in a very basic sense, all we're going to be doing with command substitution is just sort of injecting the standard output of a command that we provide into our original grep command. And what that's basically going to allow us to do is to sort of not necessarily break out of the command, but we can take advantage of the output that we're going to get in order to sort of, like we did in the previous level, sort of do a blind extraction of the password. Because, for example, if we're able to grep for anything, that's going to be our input, and you can see we're getting this output here. If we are able to sort of inject the output of that Natas webpass file, we can sort of inject another grep command. So we're essentially running the original grep command as well as a subshell process of another grep command to basically search through that Natas webpass file to see if we can pull any results. So we can say, we can use some regex when supplying our secondary command to basically say, if the Natas webpass file for Natas 17 contains, or starts with the letter capital A, then return it. And that's basically going to get appended on to our sort of input here, because again, this is going to be sort of in that subshell. We're going to get the output into there. And what's going to be returned is anything with capital A. And obviously, if we search that, we're going to get no results because there's no words in our dictionary file that contain anything with a capital A at the end. So again, we can sort of use that binary output, whether we get a result or not, to slowly but surely extract that password. And within our input here, we can provide that syntax with the $sign and the opening and closing parentheses, inject our own sort of secondary command that's going to be run in a sub-process or a subshell, and we can grab whatever the standard output is of that secondary command and inject it into our original echo statement. So we can sort of inject another echo statement within here, and we can just say hello. So in theory, what we're going to get when we echo this original test is we're going to get test with hello sort of appended to it. And you can see just like that. But we don't have to use echo, so we can actually just sort of replace whatever command we want to inject here, and we can just say cat. And if we cat out that sample flag .txt file, you can see we're getting test, and then we're getting the actual contents of that file. But because we're not actually going to get that sort of verbose output on our, Natas page here, we're going to need to do, like I said, and sort of do a blind extraction of that password. And the way we can sort of do that is by injecting a secondary grep command. So instead of cat, we're going to use grep with the tac and capital E flag, and that's basically just going to enable the extended regex or regular expression pattern matching with grep, and then we can sort of just supply some regex here. So we can supply a pattern such as this with the up arrow to specify regex, and then the dot with the asterisk, and that pattern is basically going to match any line that starts with any character and ends with any character. So essentially, we're going to match any line in the file. So if we run this, we're going to get the same sort of output as if we just catted out the file, because we're just sort of the standard output of this grep command is going to include the entire file. But we can start doing some clever things with this. If you think about our automation from last time, we can sort of, instead of looking for anything in the file, we can include or sort of loop through, the alphabet. We can inject A, B, C, D. We can sort of do this through Python requests and slowly but surely, try every combination in the password file. So because our actual sample password file contains, or it starts with the capital T, we can sort of provide that in our pattern there. And if we run this, you can see we're still getting the output. But for example, if we changed our pattern to start with the capital A, for example, well, we're not going to get an output. We're just going to get our original test output there. So we can sort of change our original cat statement out to that grep from the web page to sort of get a better idea of what's going to happen. So that's going to be grep tac I, and then whatever our pattern is. So let's do explode in quotes, and then we're going to search in dictionary.txt. But because we're going to inject it here, we actually need to move dictionary.txt to the end, and then we're going to sort of inject our subshell or our sub-process here into that original input, and then that's already closed out with the double quote, and then we're just going to provide dictionary.txt. And you can see because this original grep statement that we injected, we're searching for anything starting with the letter A. Well, we're not going to get any results. We're just going to get test, or in this case, we're just going to get explode, our original statement. And so it's actually going to return values from dictionary.txt. If we were to change this back to something we do know is going to hit on something starting with capital T, we're going to get no response because it's actually looking for explode with a capital T at the end, and that's obviously not existing in dictionary.txt. And we sort of have a script already built up from the last level that allows us to loop through anything in that string variable. So we can sort of just refactor our old getFlag script from the last level into something that's going to work with this methodology and extract the password that way. All right, so let's do that. We have our getFlag script from the last level. I'm just gonna update the authentication here for Natas 16. We already have our letters variable defined as well as our Natas pass variable defined, which is going to get appended in our for loop here. And again, we already have our loops defined. We just need to change sort of the actual response variable we're calling here using that request module. And again, if any of this doesn't make sense or you want more context on the script that we wrote here, just look at the last level for Natas 15, and we sort of walk through everything to set this script up. So we're still going to be making a post request. We're still going to be providing the URL and the authentication, obviously. We just need to change the data here. So I'm just going to empty that out. And if we look at the web page again, you can see we're using that needle parameter in our post request. And that's the parameter that we're going to need to provide or fill in our post request. So for needle, I'm going to set that to a string that's going to include our payload. And again, we're going to be looking for explosions. No, we could look for anything. That's just sort of the first word that came to mind. And then we're going to provide our command substitution using that $sign and the opening and closing parentheses. And within this, we're going to provide our secondary command, our secondary grep command, that's going to be running once again in that sub process or that sub shell. And just like we talked about, we're going to use grep with that tac capital E flag to include our own regex or extended regex. And then for our pattern, we're going to include that up arrow and then the dot and the asterisk to basically search for everything. And for the file that we're searching through, well, remember that's going to be in etc natas_webpass, and then in this case, Natas 17. So that looks good to me, but this is hard-coded, so we're going to want to inject our variables. Our Natas pass variable to basically include everything we've tried so far, as well as our current character variable within this for loop. And we're basically going to be doing that here, so we're going to loop through A, B, C, D, for example. So we have to close out our original string, and just so I don't forget, I'm going to add a space and then open that up with another quote, just so we don't have a syntax error in a second. And then we're going to add the plus to add in our Natas pass variable, and then another plus to append on the current character that we're trying. And then make sure there's another plus there. Perfect, that looks good to me, hopefully. And let's look at our logic to sort of filter out the correct response. We're not looking for exists this time, that was in the previous level. If you remember, we're looking for explosions. But instead of looking for that in the response, we want to make sure it's not in the response, and we can do that just by providing not there. Because if you remember in our last example here, if we guess the correct character, for example, it was the capital T, we're not going to get a response. We're not going to have our expected explode response there. And that's what we're going to use to basically filter out, hey, we got the correct character in this position. Let's, go through the loop again. Just so we're actually extracting and not just continually trying the same thing over and over. So we're going to look to see if the word explosions is not in our response at all. And if so, that means we got the correct character and we can start over, basically. I think with that, we should be good. So if I just hit run here, make sure everything's working. Again, this is going to take a little bit of time, so I'm just going to let it run, assuming it's working fine. So let's try. You can see we're starting to attempt passwords here, starting with the lowercase characters. All right, it looks like we hit on the capital X for the first letter. Looks like we're at X and then lowercase k now. Looks like it's working fine, so I'm just going to, let this keep going until we hit 32 characters. Okay, that finally finished. Took about 6 minutes there, and you can see in total we made about 900 or 1,000 requests in total to basically extract out the password. And all we need to do now is just test to make sure that it works. So I'm just going to echo this out and send it out to Natas 16 just so we have it. We don't have to run that 6-minute script every time. I'm just going to go back here and change this to Natas 17 to see if we can authenticate using that password. All right, perfect, we're in. You can see we're authenticated to Natas 17, and it looks like this next level has something to do with checking the existence of usernames. Maybe if I put Natas 18 in there, we'll get a hint. No, maybe not. So we'll have to see what happens in the next level. But for now, thanks for watching. We were able to sort of reuse our brute force, our blind brute force script here to take advantage of that sort of binary output we were getting. And we were able to sort of inject our own secondary or subcommand in the process. So thanks again, and stay tuned for the next video. Take care.